Hey guys, it's Tamara. Thank you for coming back to my channel. I am back with another video. I figured that we'd focus on protective and risk factors, that if we discuss that a little bit today, it'll be a little bit easy for you to jump into Monday's video and understand where I'm coming from. So for those of you who have already subscribed to my channel, thanks so much for coming back. And for those of you who are new, I encourage you to hit the subscribe button over here, so then that way you can stay tuned with me as we talk about trauma. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the protective and risk factors that are in cases of trauma, and I think it's going to help us gain a little bit of a more clear perspective. For the purposes of this video, the bonuses for you today is that you're going to learn about protective and risk factors, and I also want to talk just a little bit about intergenerational trauma. All right, so let's go ahead and get started with this video. All right, so when you hear the term protective and risk factors, what do you think of? What do you think of? A lot of people tell me that they think of this list, and risk factors basically are things, these are correct, risk factors are things that prevent us from being the very best that we can be, all right? Protective factors, right, are the things that help us be the very best that we can be. All right, so I'm going to go down a list of risk factors. We're going to start there, okay? So risk factors may include low socioeconomic status, substance abuse, poor mental health or emotional reactivity, right? You don't have the ability to react appropriately, right? You go from 0 to 100 in a matter of seconds, and you struggle to bring yourself back down, right? That's poor emotional reactivity. Poor coping style, right? You have a very hard time being a parent and managing the frustration that your children's bring up in yourself. Low self-esteem, lack of identity, right? A history of family violence or domestic abuse, right? That's a risk factor. Individuals who have grown up in households where there's domestic violence often struggle with self-identity, substance abuse, depression, and unresolved trauma. All of those things can result in a very emotionally unstable individual, all right? Or an individual who's going to need a lot of therapy in order to cope, all right? Poor academic performance and truancy are also risk factors. If you don't make education an important part of your life, you are likely to struggle throughout your life financially, right? Educationally. Sometimes you also miss developmental milestones that you would hit or experience if you were to stay in school. So those who drop out early, or those who are truant, or those who have poor academic performance often suffer the most. That's why they're called risk factors. Financial difficulties, right? Whether that's yourself or your parent, having a hard time meeting financial obligations. Other people's reactions to trauma, right? And that's called vicarious trauma. And I'm going to put that over here for you. That's called vicarious trauma or secondary trauma or stress. You can also call it secondary stress. Basically, the idea behind this is that you haven't experienced the trauma directly, but you have witnessed somebody else that's close to you, or witnessed somebody else that you know who has experienced trauma. So an example of this would be domestic violence, right? You may not have been the one being physically assaulted by dad, but you watched your mother or your father be psychologically and emotionally as well as physically abused, right? So that is secondary stress or secondary trauma or vicarious trauma. That's a risk factor, all right? The other risk factors may be lack of employment. When you are unemployed, you have a lot of time on your hands, and you're most likely to get depressed, which means you're most likely to get high a lot, drink, right? Or do things that are risky and unhealthy for yourself, or that set you back. Also, being bullied and harassed is another risk factor. And a risk factor that most mental health professionals tend to forget or minimize is living in a neighborhood where you are constantly exposed to traumatic situations. And that would include places like rural areas where there's a lot of hidden crimes or secret crimes, inner city areas or urban areas, or for lack of a better word, ghettos, or the Bronx. Those kind of places include, not always, but for the most part, violence, murder, gangs, just a lot of things that can be traumatizing to kids growing up in those neighborhoods. Hearing gunshots, right? Watching people be beat up or assaulted. Those are things that are risk factors that can contribute to and make worse your trauma. All right, so let's talk a little bit about protective factors. Protective factors are things that protect you from the risk factors. And so my list here, I listed a support system, whether that's school, friends or family, financial stability, good emotional and psychological health, right? You've been raised in a family where you know who you are, you know that your family is going to be there to support you, and you know that they love you, right? Having that good psychological and emotional health is important, okay? Positive coping skills, knowing how to cope no matter what. Negative coping skills would be substance abuse. It would be risky sexual behaviors. It would be selling drugs. It would be just kind of letting yourself regress and staying on the couch and watching TV and not really getting yourself prepared for life. Those are negative coping skills. But if you have positive coping skills like exercising, eating well, relying on family, right, going shopping, saving money, finding hobbies, those are positive coping skills. Those things will protect you from the trauma that you have experienced, okay? Usually when I do treatment plans or I set goals with my clients who are dealing with trauma, I often include those positive coping skills. What can you do on a daily basis to help yourself heal faster, to help get you through the grief and the loss process that you are going through? So that is very important, to have positive coping skills. The next thing is feeling connected to your community, your school, your church, or your support groups, right? So you have to feel connected to society in order to heal. If you feel isolated and withdrawn, you're likely to regress and you're not likely to reach out for help, all right? You have to have strong social or familial connections. If you don't have a family system, at least have a social system, right? A group of people who can support you, encourage you, and build you up, because that's technically what you need when you've been beat down so much by your trauma, all right? Employment and problem-solving skills are the other positive coping skills and protective factors that you need. Without any of these things, healing from trauma is going to be difficult, right? The higher risk factors are stacked, the worse your chances of survival. The higher positive coping skills and protective factors are stacked in your favor, the better and more likely it is that you're going to feel bad. All right, so I want you guys to keep that in mind. This video was helpful. I encourage you to give it a thumbs up. Thank you so much for visiting me today, and I will see you on Monday. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.